Thank you, delegates, for joining in. We will now begin the session. I'll introduce myself once again. My name is Jaideep Singh, and I'm the Secretary General of the MUN at Home program at MUN Impact. And I welcome you to this session by one of our very special speakers, Mr. Wesley, who is the head of the Thirst Project. He is the Director of Student Activation at the Thirst Project, and he spends his time traveling around the United States, speaking to middle school, high school, and college students about the global water crisis. Evan has spoken to over 75,000 students as a keynote speaker, working with and speaking to groups including the United Nations, the UNICEF, the National Association of Student Councils, Key Club International, HOSA, World Link Peace and Justice, the North American Hair Association, etc. To date, Evan and the Thirst Project team have given clean water to over 330,000 people in 13 different countries. Currently, Evan and the Thirst Project team work closely with the government and the Kingdom of Swaziland, now Eswatini, to build freshwater wells for communities in need with the goal to end the water crisis in Swaziland by 2022. I've had the honor of meeting him a few years back in QLC. I don't think you remember that, but he was at the Qatar Leadership Conference a few years back, and I saw him there as well. So it's glad to have him back, and I welcome him on the floor. Evan, it's all yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm testing out the new microphone. Is this okay? Yeah, we're in. I love it. Amazing. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone around the world. What a special space to be in here with MUN Impact Global Summit. I was going to ask to have all the participants put in the chat where you're from, but I see that you've already done that. You're way ahead of me with the names of your accounts, which is amazing. So my name is Evan. If I don't know you, from Los Angeles, California, I'm here right now, and I'm so stoked to talk to you about the work that we can do together to get us closer as a global community to achieving the SDGs as a movement of young people committed to taking action. So that's where my next few minutes are going to be focused on, taking action and the SDGs. And if it's okay, I'd actually love to share my screen. I'm going to pop up a PowerPoint, and I'm going to walk us through what we can do as a movement of students or young people across the world who are committed to global issues to bring us one step closer to ending the global water crisis. But before I dive too deep into all of that, I'm going to share my screen. And as I walk through this PowerPoint, I am going to talk about a couple concepts that I think are really, really important. So you all should be seeing a PowerPoint right now with a slide that says Thirst Project. And boom. Are you guys seeing a Thirst Project slide, and a Thirst Project slide only, correct? Not the next slide, just the Thirst Project on it. Sweet, amazing. So I work for an organization called Thirst Project. And like I said, or like what was mentioned in the bio, we've been working to end the global water crisis. And we've been working a lot with students. And I've had the privilege to travel around the world to meet students that are as young as 3-4 years old, that are as old as university students pursuing a master's or a doctorate degree. And I've talked a lot about this idea of success. And I've really started to ask questions to young people to try and get to know them better, to try and get to know their pursuits better, about what their idea of success is. What does success mean to you? And here's what I've found to be true for young people across the world. This idea of success oftentimes doesn't come from their own opinions, their own ideas, or their own pursuits. This idea of success oftentimes is shaped by the people, places, things, culture, or society around them. And so if I asked you the question, how do you define success? What would you say? And I'd be really curious to know your answer. And if we can in the chat, I'd love to see some answers. And so it's not a trick question, but I'm going to ask it again. What is the idea or definition of success for you in life right now? How do you define success? What is success? I'd love to see some answers. And so if you want to put your answer in the chat, that'd be awesome. But as I look at this idea of success, or this definition, yeah, please keep going. Reaching my full potential, achieving something. Success is setting a goal, being able to achieve it, achieving your goal, hitting goals, achieving your goals, gaining knowledge, getting the outcomes, achieving goals, being outstanding. When you want to do something that's amazing. Awesome. It seems like we have some pretty common ideas of success that are a little bit ambiguous, right? It's setting a goal and achieving it, right? That is success. And so let me ask you a follow-up question then, because I see a lot of achieving goals. and we're going to talk about goals in a second. So what's your biggest goal in life right now? If success means achieving your goals, then my follow-up question is, what's the biggest goal in your life right now? This is not a trick question. Maybe for some of you, it's getting into a specific university. Maybe for some of you, it's traveling to a specific place. What's the biggest goal that you have in your life right now? And so I'd love to see that into your chat. We got to get into MIT, get a good job, good career, good money, follow your passion, improve my fitness, get good grades. We're going to Cambridge, finding a passion, graduating school, getting into a good uni, being a leader in my country, good grades in travel. Man, I'm loving this. This is amazing. Getting a good IB score, survive the summit, survive and advance the summit. I love that. Do well in IB history. This is incredible. I appreciate you all being willing to get a little vulnerable and share your goals. I had a goal actually 2 days ago. So I went on a water fast. I only drank water for 48 hours. And my goal was to, similar to Nicola's goal of surviving the MU and Impact Summit, my goal was to survive those 2 days of a water fast, right? Drinking nothing but water. It's not something I typically do, but here we are. So we're talking about success. We're talking about goals. I want to narrow in on this topic, this subject of success. And here's what I've found to be true of young people across the world. You can't find success in your life, but if you don't define success. So you have to be able to define success before you can find it. And so that's why I asked you, what is your definition of success? All of you, or most of you, talked about, identifying a goal and achieving your goal. So the follow-up question would be, what are your goals? And it was interesting to see some of your goals, right? A lot of them had to related to school, university. Some of them related to travel. Some of them related to getting a good career, making money in the future. And again, here's what I found to have been true over the past few years. Oftentimes, definitions of success have been shaped by the people, the places, or the culture around us. And so success for young people in school oftentimes has looked like go to school and get really good grades in school so you can go into a good university, and get to a good university so you can get a good job so you can make good money, and go in your life and make good money so you can take care of your family in the future. And as you take care of your family in the future, you can make more money. And maybe with more of that money, you can buy lots of cool stuff. And later in life, after you have all of this cool stuff and you've made good money and you've taken care of your family, you've accumulated all of these things, maybe materials, but also hopefully experiences, so that at the end of your life, with that money and that stuff, you die. And oftentimes society or culture says that's what success looks like. That's what we have to look forward to. And what I'm here to talk about is success redefined as a more adventurous opportunity for you in your life. And so again, my hope is that I am speaking to a community of people with very different definitions of success. For some of you, it's pursuing higher education. For some of you, it's making lots of money so that you can do good in the world. For some of you, it's traveling. For some of you, it's working for a nonprofit or working for local, state, or regional governments. I don't know how you define it, but I do know how you find it. And I'm going to get there next, right? So define it for yourself. That's my piece of advice for you. Don't let parents, don't let society, don't let culture influence you first. Yes, some of those may be positive influences, but think about you for yourself. How do you define success? And it's really cool as we look at Model United Nations. We have a great model that has been set before us. Definition of success. A lot of you mentioned goals. Success is directly tied to goals. And the United Nations came together a few years ago, and they set a pretty good model for what success looks like at the global stage. And it's through the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And I know this conference over the past day and over the next couple days will continue to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. And so I don't want to belabor a point, but I'm assuming your familiarity with these goals. They're huge goals, and they were formed with the member states of the United Nations years ago. And to simplify these goals, the UN came together and said, hey, the world has some problems, and we need to identify some markers to fix these problems. And so if you think about goals in your personal life, and then you think about goals at the global stage, man, I can't think of a bigger goal than number one, ending poverty as we know it. I literally can't think of a bigger goal. And so these 17 Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations set before the global community are huge. I mean, they are massive, right? Ending hunger, good health and well-being for all, quality education for all. The global stage has been set for our markers of success. But in order to actually find success, You then have to identify the community, the group of people that are going to help you get there. So if we want to, as a global community, achieve these 17 sustainable development goals, how are we going to do that? Who is going to help us actually reach these huge, huge milestones? And so the United Nations had to identify a community, right? But that was pretty easy because the community came together to actually set the goals. And so the community was the member states that made up the United Nations, right? I mean, it's these states and these groups that said, man, this is what we care about. These are the 17 sustainable development goals. These are not just the goals, but the targets and indicators that we're going to set to reach these goals. And we have a community, the United Nations as a group, these member states who are bought into these goals and who are committed to helping us reach each milestone. And so I think success is directly tied to community. And there's an old African proverb that speaks to that. So I need to tell you this: if you want to be successful in life, for a lot of you, that meant reaching your goals, and your goals were directly tied to your education, or maybe your travel experiences, or your professional and career opportunities. If you want to be successful in life, what's the first step and what's the best way to get there initially? It's through a great community. It's through surrounding yourself with a group of people who will challenge you, enable you, support you, and help you get there. And I'd love to bring it back to my work at Thirst Project. So I work for an NGO, and we've been engaging with young people for the past 11 years now. But when we started 11 years ago at Thirst Project, we were actually started by students just like you. Students who wanted to do good in the world, but maybe they didn't know how. And so these students living in Southern California had to identify what success looked like. So if we were going to create this group that had some kind of goal, what was the goal? What was success? And the goal, success, looked like giving everybody in the world access to clean water. That was it. And 11 years ago, there was over a billion with a B, people on our planet who did not have access to clean water. And so our goal, defining success, meant everybody has clean water. Man, we want to reach the corners of the earth, the most rural and vulnerable populations, and we want to provide access to clean water to these individuals. And so when we set that goal to end the global water crisis, it was a big goal. It was a lofty goal. And so we had to ask the follow-up question, okay, if our goal is to give everyone in the world clean water, who's our community that's going to help us do that? Who's our target audience? I mean, who are the individuals that we will engage with that will get us closer to ending the global water crisis? And so we had to pick a community. We had to choose a group of people that we would focus our efforts on, that we would choose to educate, that we would choose to raise awareness with. And so the community of people we chose was you. We chose Model United Nations students, and not just MUN students. We chose students around the world. But I do truly believe in the past couple of years, with my work in the Model UN community, that Model United Nations students are the perfect archetype individual that we can work with, that we can collaborate and co-labor alongside to end the global water crisis. And so if our goal at Thirst Project is to end the global water crisis, you need to know that our community that we know will help us end the global water crisis is you. I'm speaking to the very people who will help us push the water crisis into the history books. And so my hope is for the next few minutes, you will lean in to this message. You will self-identify as an individual who can be a mover and shaker in the global community to help us achieve SDG 6. We're trying to end the global water crisis and provide everyone in the world access to clean water. And maybe you're somebody who doesn't really care about the water crisis. And that might sound harsh because deep down as a Model UN student, I mean, I would argue that you should care about the water crisis, but maybe your priorities are in different places. Maybe you would lend your heart to a different cause, like food insecurity or education initiatives or gender equality. I want to talk about that in a second, but where I want to start is some context of the global water crisis. So right now on our planet, over 600 million people don't have access to safe, clean drinking water. And if you look at the breakdown of water that's available on our planet, there's actually not a lot available to you and I in the form of consumption. Yeah, the earth is about 70% water, but when you go down to how much fresh water is available, and then when you go down to how much fresh water is actually available, not tied up in deep underground aquifers or glaciers, then there's only about 0.5% of the water on the planet that's available to you and I to drink, to wash with, to cook with. And I'm saying there's over 600 million people on our planet that do not have access to safe, clean drinking water. I could show you a map of countries that I know some of you live in across the world where there are individuals that are living without the water they need to survive. I mean, the darkest of countries represent populations where people don't have access to the 5 gallons of water they need to cook with, wash with, drink with, etc. And we could go to places on this map where people do have access to water for the most part. I'm talking about places like maybe India, China, Brazil, but the water they have access to is contaminated. It's filled with waterborne diseases. And a statistic that we oftentimes use is waterborne diseases kill about 1,000 children every single day. And about every 90 seconds, a child dies from waterborne diseases. And the problem is waterborne diseases are completely preventable. We know the solution. It's not like a vaccine that we don't have, with respect to COVID right now, it's really topical. Clean water is the solution, and we know how to solve the problem. The reality is we just have not reached the corners of the earth to establish safe water systems for people in need. And so people are still dying from completely preventable waterborne diseases. I want to go into a storytelling time. I'm going to take the next few minutes and I just want to share some stories with you. These are stories of real people who have been really affected by the global water crisis. But before I share these stories, I want to challenge you with a concept. I talked about goals, talked about the Sustainable Development Goals. I talked about how the United Nations set some big goals for us as a global community. And oftentimes when people look at our work at Thirst Project, they think of our work just with respect to SDG 6. Man, if we're going to give people access to clean water, then that means we're helping achieve SDG 6, clean water and sanitation for all. But I would challenge you to think about clean water, not just for the sake of clean water and sanitation, but how clean water impacts and affects other SDGs. And so for the next few minutes, I'm going to share some stories with you. And these stories will unpack how clean water has changed either an individual or a community's life. And at the end of the story, I'm going to bring up another SDG. And I'm going to talk about how clean water directly impacts things like poverty, things like food security or hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, decent work, and economic growth. Because here's my belief. My belief is that clean water impacts so many aspects of life and development. And I'm going to talk about how, and if you want to help solve the SDGs, it makes the most sense, in my biased opinion, to start working to end the global water crisis. So I'm going to jump into some stories. These are stories of real people that have been really affected by a very real global water crisis. And while I share these stories, I know that I'm speaking to a dispersed community of individuals living around the world. Maybe some of you have seen, felt, or lived through the water crisis, but maybe some of you haven't. And so for the people that have never had to walk miles, kilometers, hours a day to fetch water, or for the people that have never lost a loved one or had a loved one get sick with a waterborne disease, I think these next few minutes might be a little challenging for you. But I want you to think about, what would my life look like if every single day I didn't have water readily available to me, but instead you had to walk kilometers a day just to fetch water that wasn't even clean, so you and your family could have something to drink, to wash with, to cook with, etc. So my first story, it comes from the tiny nation of Eswatini, and it's of a little boy named Gupa. Gupa's on the right, Sandiswa is on the left. Gupa has the hat on, and Gupa lives in a really small community called Imgamude in the really small country of Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland. If you don't know much about Eswatini, it's a tiny country, sits on the northeastern border of South Africa. What's unique about Eswatini is it has the highest density population of AIDS in the world. About a quarter of the adult population in Eswatini has AIDS. And if you drink dirty water and you have AIDS, because your immune system is already so compromised, drinking dirty water can kill you faster than AIDS will. And so we do most of our work in Eswatini for a couple different reasons that I'll talk about later. But I was in Eswatini a couple years ago and I met Gupa, and we spent about a week together. And we did everything together, man. We did dances, we played games, and I felt like by the end of the week, I had really connected with Gupa. I felt like I really knew Gupa. And he was only 6 years old, and he didn't speak any English. And so there was a lot of nonverbal communication that took place. But after all these dances and after all these games, the time when I had to leave Gupa, it was hard, right? I really didn't want to leave the community of Imgamude, and I really didn't want to depart, with my time from Gupa. But about halfway through our time together, Gupa and I, spending, quality time playing games and doing dances in the community of Imgamude, his cousin came up to me 3 days into our trip. And she said, "Evan, it looks like you're having some fun with Gupa." And her name was Pepile. She spoke really good English. And I said, "Yeah, I'm having a blast with Gupa. This is so fun." And she said, can I tell you a story about Gupa? And I said, yeah. And she said, when Gupa was 4 years old, so this was 2 years before I met Gupa, he would walk to his community's water source and he would collect water every single day. And he would collect water from an open hole in the ground. It was dug into a dry riverbed. So Gupa, his family, and his community could access what little water was available beneath the surface. Gupa would collect this water and he would bring it back for his family. And one morning, as a 4-year-old, Gupa woke up and he had a stomach ache and he felt really sick and he started urinating blood. And they found out that he had this parasite called schistosomiasis. And schistosomiasis is a parasite that lives inside of contaminated water. And you can get it from drinking contaminated water or simply wading or walking through contaminated water. And Gupa had it. And Gupa wasn't alone in contracting schistosomiasis. There was a community just by Mgamude and Gupa's house where hundreds of kids had gotten schistosomiasis months before because they all walked through the same contaminated river. And so I'm talking to Spepile about this parasite. I'm talking to Spepile about how Gupa had schistosomiasis, how he was urinating blood, how it was incredibly painful. And I started to get curious about schistosomiasis on a global level. And so I went home and I Googled schistosomiasis at the end of my trip. And the most recent statistics that I could find from the World Health Organization stated that back in 2016, over 300 million people had schistosomiasis across the world. Over 300 million people had this waterborne disease that caused them to urinate blood across the world. And yet, in my time traveling across the globe, speaking to young people, I've found that almost nobody's ever heard of this disease, yet 300 million people have it. And so schistosomiasis is just one example of how clean water directly impacts good health and well-being. And I'll talk about COVID and the impact of clean water on this current pandemic later. But we have to know that, man, if you believe in giving people access to health and sanitation services, then I would argue you believe in giving people access to clean water. Water is preventative medicine. Next story I want to share with you is of my friend Abby. She's in the middle and she's surrounded by people in the community of Kagwebu. And Kagwebu is a community in rural Eswatini, and we were fortunate enough to build a project in this community. And as we walked around the community, individuals told us about the impact of having access to close, safe water. So you can see one of the touch points of the water project that we built in Kagwebu. We had 5 touch points similar to this scattered around the community. And because the community of Kagwebu had access to clean water, they were able to establish gardens like this. You could see in the foreground of this picture how green and how bright the garden is at this homestead in the community of Kagwebu. And that's Abby with this lady who lives at this homestead who's growing these vegetables. She's growing things like papaya, chilies, mango, spinach. All of these things are possible because the community of Kagwebu has access to clean water. And if you see in the background, the brown grass and how dried out the scenery is, that's because Eswatini is experiencing a drought. They're in a dry season. And so without having access to clean water through a touch point of a borehole well, the community can't grow vegetables. They can't grow the food that they need to meet their nutritional needs every day. And so I think it's important for you to know that if you believe in access to food, if you believe in eliminating hunger across the planet, then you believe in having access to a sustainable water source. We always say that you can't have food security without water security. And so SDG number 2 of eliminating hunger as we know it is completely reliant upon a safe, sustainable water source. And so it's so important to establish a secure, safe, sustainable water source, to establish a safe, secure, and sustainable food source. Food is impacted directly by water access and availability. About a year ago, I met this friend. Her name was Anne in northern Uganda, and she opened up her home to give our team a place to stay. And as we talked, Anne figured out that our team was in northern Uganda building wells for communities in need. And Anne asked me, she said, Evan, can I tell you a story of my community, the community of Chawente, and my life growing up? And so Anne went into the story of how she would wake up every single morning at 3 a.m. and she would walk about 15 kilometers to collect water. And she would wake up at 3 a.m. to escape the heat of the day because it was a 7-hour journey. And after walking 15 kilometers, her goal was to get back every single morning by 10 a.m. so that she could escape the heat of the day before it gets too hot. And so she would walk these 15 kilometers and she would collect water for her homestead. She would go to a lake, and this lake was massive. And so hundreds of people would go to this lake every single day to collect water. But depending on the wet or dry season, oftentimes the lake would almost completely dry up. And when this happened, Anne would go to collect water, she would bring it back for her family. But because there was such little water available in the dry season, on the return journey home, Anne would start to be attacked by bees. So bees would try to access what little water was available in the can that she used to collect water. And so Anne walking hours a day, 15 kilometers to collect water, unfortunately is not a unique story. This is not a one-off case study. Millions of women and children every single day walk hours a day, multiple kilometers to collect and carry water. And oftentimes women and children collect and carry water in what's called a jerry can. You can think of it as our version of a yellow or diesel gas can, but in the developing world, it's used to collect water. And when full, it weighs about 20 kilograms, 44 pounds. And the average distance that women and children walk to fetch water is about 6 kilometers. And so imagine you have to carry 20 kilograms of water, 44 pounds, 6 kilometers, or a little bit over 3 miles. It's very physically demanding. It can take women and children, just like Anne, about 6 to 8 hours to collect water, which means that kids can't go to school and get an education. It means that women can't get jobs to provide for their families. And if I had you pick up 20 kilograms of water and I had you walk just a few yards, right, just a few meters, I think you would start to understand the physical demand of collecting water. It's intense. Oftentimes you will see women and children collect and carry water and then put it on their heads for the ease of balancing the jug. But when you put 20 kilograms of water on your head and you carry it for kilometers every single day, it can start to take a physical toll on your body. And so we've seen women and children develop spinal and pelvic deformities just from collecting and carrying water. We've seen women who are pregnant have spontaneous miscarriages, all from collecting and carrying water. And so talking about other SDGs and how just collecting and carrying water impacts the goals that have been set before us by the United Nations, gender equality is a huge goal directly impacted by the global water crisis. If you noticed in the last few minutes, I didn't talk about how men collect and carry water, because rarely, if ever, will you see men walking to collect water for homesteads or communities in need. It's most of the time women or young children, and the children oftentimes are girls. And so this is a gender equality issue without question, right? In order to restore women and young girls' opportunities at education or women's opportunities at work, we have to establish close, safe water sources for communities. And this is also directly tied to education. When we talk about kids having to walk kilometers, hours a day to collect water, that means that kids can't go to school, they can't get an education. And so establishing a close, safe water source means that kids don't have to walk X amount of hours, X amount of kilometers a day, so they can go into school and they can get the education they need. And so water is directly tied to gender equality and quality education. And this last story I want to share with you is one of this lady named Tabsile, who you're looking at right now. Tabsile lives in a rural community in Eswatini, and we met her a few years ago, and we found out that she was a teacher at a rural school in Eswatini. And so we asked Tabsile, we said, what is life like as a teacher in Eswatini? Because I have a pretty good understanding of what life is like as a teacher in the United States. I have a twin sister, she's a teacher. I have a mom as a teacher, but I have no idea what life is like as a teacher in rural Eswatini. So I asked Tabsile to take us through her daily routine. I said, Tabsile, tell us what you do from the time that you wake up to the time that you go to sleep. And she said she wakes up at about 5 a.m. and she walks here, where you're looking, to her community's water source. Yeah, this is where they collect water. It's essentially a drainage ditch. But she goes down to this water source and she fills up this black bucket that you're looking at full of water. And this black bucket holds 5 gallons of water, and she will collect this water and she'll then put it on her head. And when she puts this water on her head, she will then walk about 2 kilometers to school. And so her daily commute is walking 2 kilometers with about 20 kilograms of water on her head. And when she gets to school, she has 15 kids to take care of. And on any given day, the only water that Tabsile and these kids have available to them is this 20 kilograms. weight of water. And if you're thinking, well, 5 gallons that weighs 20 kilograms, it's not that bad, right? They're preschoolers. They probably don't need that much water. They're young kids. Just to give you some context, the average American, one person here in the United States, uses about 100 gallons of water. 15 people, so 15 kids, and then one teacher, Tabsile. So 16 total individuals only had access to 5 gallons of water. Yet in the United States, one person uses 100 gallons of water a day. And this is the water that they had for all of their daily uses. So it wasn't just drinking, but it was cooking, it was washing, it was everything. And Tabsile talked about not having access to close, safe water at her school. She talked about how kids would miss school for weeks because they would drink the water that she would collect and they'd get sick. She talked about how they couldn't grow fresh vegetables that they needed for the kids for their lunch because they didn't have enough water to grow the vegetables in a garden. She also talked about her work and how she had friends who would go and collect water for their homesteads and they didn't have a job to provide for their families because their task was to go and collect water every single day. And so if we look at Tabsile's story, there are so many SDGs that we can focus on, but I want to encourage you to lean into the fact that decent work and economic growth are directly impacted by the global water crisis. There are millions of women right now who do not have a job because their one job is actually a task, and that task is to go and collect water for their families, for their homesteads. And if we look at the opportunity for women to work, to provide for their family, we increase the chances or the likelihood of women in rural communities having the opportunity to work when we provide a close, safe water source, when we take that task off of their to-do list to go and collect water for their families. And so as you think back to the stories that I talked about for the last few minutes and the SDGs that were impacted, I would tell you that the water crisis is a huge problem. It's massive in scale, and I would argue that it's complex. It's not as simple as people don't have water, they get sick from drinking dirty water, and that's the issue. No, it's because people don't have access to clean water that economic opportunity is stunted. It's a gender equality issue in communities and countries around the world. It is a educational missed opportunity for students that can't go to school. There's health and sanitation implications when you don't have access to clean water. There are so many issues that come with not having access to clean water. But for Thirst Project, we work in 13 countries around the world, and our solution is pretty simple. So yes, the problem might be complex, but when you build a freshwater well, when you build a deep borehole well for a community, it can mean the difference between a group of people being forced to drink water that looks like this and a group of people having access to water that looks like this. And overnight, literally overnight, clean water changes everything in a community. Disease rates can drop upwards of 88% overnight. Child mortality rates can drop upwards of 90% overnight. We talked about the opportunity that kids can get to go to school and get an education. When you build a close, safe water source, kids can go to school and kids can get an education. Or women can get jobs, women can provide for their families with a close, safe water source. And the work that we do at Thirst Project is nothing revolutionary. All we do is we hire a local independent contractor. And these contractors take their big rigs and they drill deep. They drill about 100 meters into the ground to access the aquifers, groundwater that's available with a pump so we can bring it up to the surface and provide safe, clean water for a community of, on average, 500 people. That's the work that we do at Thirst Project. Now, I've been talking about Thirst Project, and in the beginning, I talked about how we started. I talked about how we had to choose a community of people that we wanted to focus on. And I think it's important for you to know, as we talk about taking action as a young person, as we talk about your opportunity to do something about SDGs in the world, I think it's important for you to know that Thirst Project, like I mentioned earlier, was started by a group of young people just like you. It was 7 students. They were living in Southern California. They heard about the water crisis and they said, man, we have to do something. And so they went out to Hollywood Boulevard, one of the most touristy streets in all of the United States. And they just started talking to people. They challenged individuals to carry full jerry cans of water to a clothing store and back to see what it felt like to collect and carry water. They also talked to a couple teachers on that day. And these 2 teachers said, man, I love what you're telling me. Will you come to my school? Will you tell my students about the water crisis? And so through 2 local presentations, students heard about the water crisis and they said, man, we want to get involved. And through that process, these students then were inspired to raise thousands of dollars to help build a water project for a community. And that started the Thirst Project. We realized on that day that students have an ability to do epic things for global issues. And so 11 years ago, when Thirst Project all started, we did something then that we continue to do now, which is travel the world and then talk to and inspire young people to take action, to do amazing things for the water crisis. And we've been lucky enough to talk to hundreds of thousands of students about the global water crisis. And we have challenged young people to do something about it. And it's been amazing to see young people as young as 3 years old say, I can help. I can do something to help in the water crisis. And so students have done crazy things for the water crisis, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But as I talk about students and this movement of young people contributing to our cause, contributing to getting us closer to ending the water crisis, I think it's important to show you impact. I think it's important to show you progress. And so in the last decade, here's what we've seen happen. About 10, 11 years ago when we started, like I said earlier, there was over a billion with a B, people on our planet who did not have access to safe, clean drinking water. And you can see that this graph is even a little bit outdated, but in the past 10 years, what we've seen is the number of people who live without access to clean water that has dramatically decreased. I mean, we've almost cut that number in half. Right now, the most recent data shows that just over 600 million people don't have access to safe, clean drinking water. And so what does that mean? It means that we are making amazing progress. It means that, in my opinion, we will see the end of the global water crisis in our lifetime. We will be the generation to push the water crisis into the history books. Now it's just a matter of how fast can we do it? And so it's really important for you to know that we are making strides to get us closer to not just SDG 6, but all the other SDGs that are impacted by the water crisis. And that's what brings me to our SWAZI 2022 campaign. We committed back in 2012 to do what nobody's ever done before, and that is end the water crisis in an entire country. And we chose the nation of Eswatini for a couple reasons. First, like I mentioned earlier, the AIDS crisis in Eswatini. And so if we could give everybody in that country clean water, we could give them a better chance at fighting their fight of AIDS, because their immune systems are compromised. They need access to clean water to be able to fight that fight. But the second reason was because in giving the entire country of Eswatini clean water, we wanted to build a case study to show that if you invest in clean water, it changes all aspects of life and development. And so as we're ending the water crisis in Eswatini, as we're seeking to get closer to reaching that goal, we are taking data and statistics to show how clean water improves education rates, to show how clean water improves health and sanitation rates, to show how it improves economic opportunity, to show how it improves food security, so that we can go to huge players in the global development space. And we can say, man, if you want to achieve SDG number 1, if you want to end poverty as we know it, you have to first invest in clean water. So important. And so that contributes to our belief that clean water impacts so many aspects of life and development. So as I wrap up, because I want to leave time for Q&A, I just want to remind you that our community that we have chosen to help us reach our goal to end the water crisis, it is you, it is students. But it's not just the students in this Zoom session, it really is students all over the world. I have had the privilege of working with students around the globe who have said yes to helping end the global water crisis, who have said, yes, I have everything that I need right now in my power to make a difference in the world. We've seen students do walks for water. We've seen students do dances for water. We've seen students give up their birthday for clean water. And we've worked with Model UN students who have gone around the world to help us do incredible things for the water crisis. We've had a Model UN group in Southern California who's raised almost $100,000 for clean water projects. And they went to the communities of Eswatini where they funded projects to talk about the impact of clean water. We've worked with some amazing groups in Spain who have contributed to our work to ending the global water crisis. We've spoken at conferences and they've done fundraisers for our initiatives because they said yes to their ability to helping end the water crisis. We've also worked with some amazing groups in India and Qatar to help end the water crisis by speaking at conferences and raising awareness of the water crisis. And so I want to focus on action right now for the next 2 minutes. And I want you to think about your opportunity to do something about the global water crisis. And us at Thirst Project, we say that there are 4 ways that you can really make impact on a global issue. I'll talk about the global water crisis, but it's not exclusive to the global water crisis. There are so many other issues that you can attribute these next principles to. 4 ways. if you want to make impact right now as a young person, you can use your voice. You could raise awareness, whether that's through social media, whether that's through in-person conversations. Oftentimes people don't associate awareness to impact, but I would disagree. You are planting the seeds and you might not see the fruit in the future of a conversation you have with an individual, but it is so important. So much of our work is just telling people around the world, hey, did you know that there are hundreds of millions of people that do not have access to clean water? So use your voice. It is so important about global issues that currently exist in our world today. Awareness is key, and we believe it's the first step to getting us closer to achieving these SDGs. The second is your vote. Some of you are like, Evan, what are you talking about? I'm 15 years old. I can't vote. Depending on where you're at in the country. I know for our students in the United States, right, 18 is the age that they can go and vote. But even before 18, they have the opportunity to vote in their school elections. They can vote in different student officers who have different platforms for good. And so if and when that opportunity presents itself for you to vote, by voting, I would argue that you can create impact in the future. The third is time. What do I mean by time? I mean volunteering your time. I mean giving of your time. Time is a precious resource. And so when you choose to volunteer your time, when you choose to give back, there is so much impact to be had in those moments. And the last is money. Whether it's donations, whether it's through fundraisers, money for NGOs specifically can directly contribute to so many different causes. And so I want to give you an opportunity to connect with us at Thirst Project. If anything I've said today is like, oh, this is impactful, I want to know more, then here are some ways to do that. First, you can follow us at Thirst Project. I mean, probably our most popular platform is Instagram. So if you want to connect with me or our team, you can @Thirst Project on all of these platforms, and we are there, we are available. And so go follow us, and you can just be plugged into the work that we're doing to end the water crisis. I want to bring this back to what I talked about in the beginning. I want to talk about success and community, success in your life. As a young person, here's what you need to know. You need to know as a student, you are the most powerful agent of social change. You have everything in your power right now to make a difference in the world, and you don't have to be older, you don't have to have more money, and you don't have to have a higher education to create impact. How do I know? How do I know that's true? It's because I've seen it. It's because I'm lucky enough to witness it every single day with the students that I work alongside to end the water crisis. And so know that. Do not delay the inevitable. You will create impact in your life. And so don't say, I'll start tomorrow. Don't say, I'll start when I graduate uni. Don't say, I'll start when I have more money. No, you can start now. Create impact. Use your voice, use your vote, use your time, use your money to do something about the issues that currently plague our world, and find a great community who's going to push you to be a person of impact at an international level. Surround yourself with the people who challenge you, enable you, support you, who will help you get there. And I would argue, if you're struggling with community, if you're struggling with a group of people that can help you get there, a great place to start is here. It's in the MUN community, because I've found some super special people who are motivating and inspiring, who will push you to do amazing things. The last thing I want to share with you is, I've asked this question a lot to people around the world, and I'd be curious to know your answer. I'm not going to ask you to put it in a chat, but if I asked you the question, what is the greatest threat to humanity today? What do you think the greatest threat to humanity is? I've asked that question a lot, and I think some people's answers have changed, and it also depends on where you live. And so if I asked you the question, what's the greatest threat to humanity today? I'd be curious to know your answer. I've heard a lot of people say climate change. I've heard a lot of people in the US and around the world talk about like racial injustices. I see the chat going up, and so I haven't pulled up the chat at all, but I see apathy, I see people, I see hunger, no food or water, maybe ignorance. Man, I'd be curious to know your answer. And you can put it in the chat if you want, but I will say this. I would say that COVID as a pandemic is incredibly huge. It's an incredibly huge issue, but I don't think it's the biggest threat to humanity today. I don't think climate change is the greatest threat to humanity. And I don't even think the global water crisis is the greatest threat to humanity today. I think some of you actually have hit the nail on the head. And I think that the greatest threat to humanity today is the belief that someone else will save it. It's this apathy, and I think somebody mentioned it. It's this, distancing of yourself from the issues that currently plague our world. And so I would encourage you to hold a strong belief in your own ability to do amazing things for the world. And so I'm going to give you an opportunity. If you want to plug in, if you say, man, Thirst Project seems like an NGO that I could get on board with, I think that I want to maybe sign up or contribute in some way, shape, or form to their cause, or I'm going to work alongside the Thirst Project team to end global issues. I'm going to put right now a form in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to put a form in here so you guys can connect with our team and get more involved in the work that we're doing. And so I want to say thank you everybody for participating. Thanks for being here. Thank you to the facilitators for making this opportunity possible. And I'm excited to see where you as a group of young people go in creating impact for global issues. So yeah, you all are amazing. I'll drop this link in the chat. And I don't know if we have time for a couple Q&A, and I don't know how you all have been facilitating that, but I'd love to answer any questions that people have in the last minute that we have.
Thank you, Evan. A big round of virtual applause for Evan for that very, very inspirational speech. I had the same goosebumps I had at QLC a few years back. And thank you so much, Evan. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up in a minute, to be precise, and we will not be able to have any question and answers. But nonetheless, it's been an amazingly enriching session for all of us. And we hope to see you again at MUN Impact and our summits in the future. And I hope our delegates take away something inspiring and do join into the first project.
Thank you, my friend. Really quick, I dropped the form in the chat. And so if you guys want to click on that form before you go, that's a form you can fill out to get more involved with Thirst Project. So thank you all. I really appreciate it.
I would just like to say something. Sorry, JD, I'm going to interrupt. I just wanted to say, as a teacher who runs an MUN conference in Bilbao in Spain, having heard Evan speak somewhere else, I invited him over to my conference and he spoke in my committees and at my opening ceremony. The students loved it. So if you are involved in organising an MUN project or conference or any other activity at your school, please contact Evan or any of his team and have them come over to your school and talk to you as a school, because it is worth it. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Evan.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. And with this, we'll conclude the session. You are free to leave to your next session. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the conference.
I am going to have to close this room to start my next session. It is back-to-back non-stop here. Evan, thanks. It's lovely to see you, even online, and we'll talk again soon. Hopefully.
Stay safe and healthy. Thank you,
and you.
Nicola and everyone else. I appreciate you all, okay? Have a great summit and a great rest of the day, okay?
Thanks.
Cheers, you all.
Bye, everyone.
Yep.